Rats are often part of the garden, allotment, or farm ecosystem. With plenty of food available in the gardens and in the compost, lots of habitat and places to build nests or to hide in the surrounding landscape, and often a lack of natural predators, there isn't a lot to prevent the increase in rat population.
The crates arrived at the dock under the hot Jamaican sun, carrying 4 males and 5 females, 9 small animals. That was all it took to rewrite the history of an entire ecosystem. The plan was simple. Release them into the sugar fields and watch the rat population vanish. And at first, it worked like magic. But then the farmers noticed something strange. The birds stopped singing. The snakes disappeared. The rats were still there, but everything else was vanishing. The solution had become a problem far worse than the one it was meant to solve. Invasion of the black rats. Deep beneath the lush, rolling fields of Jamaica, a war was raging. For centuries, sugar cane was the lifeblood of the Caribbean. It was green gold, fueling empires and building fortunes. But by the mid-19th century, that dream was turning into a rotting nightmare. You see, ships coming from the old world didn't just bring supplies, they brought stowaways. Black and brown rats scurried off the decks and found themselves in a paradise with 0 predators and an endless buffet of sugar. The situation was catastrophic. These weren't just a few pests in the barn. We are talking about millions of rodents chewing through the base of the cane stalks. The plants would topple over, the juice would sour, and the sugar content would plummet. It was a total disaster. Basically, entire plantations were being wiped out before harvest. Some estimates say that by the 1870s, nearly 20% of the entire sugar output was going straight into the bellies of rats. That is a loss of millions of dollars in today's money. The landowners were desperate. They were racking their brains, trying to find anything that could stop the bleeding. They tried everything, and that is putting it lightly. They brought in ferrets, but the tropical heat took them out. They brought in grand toads from Barbados, hoping they would eat the young rats. But here is the deal. The toads looked around, saw the rats, and decided they would rather eat chicken eggs and beneficial insects instead. It was a total failure. Then things got even weirder. A guy named Sir Stamford Raffles had the bright idea to import a specific type of aggressive ant from Cuba, the Formica omnivora. The name literally means eats everything. And yeah, they lived up to the name. The ants didn't care about rats. They swarmed bird nests and attacked young farm animals. The cure was becoming as bad as the disease. Meanwhile, the rats were getting smarter. They adapted. They realized the fields were dangerous during the day, so they built massive underground cities. Beneath the roots of the cane, safe from traps and dogs, they multiplied. At night, the fields would come alive with millions of glinting eyes. It was like a horror movie. The planters were losing their minds. They needed a predator that could go where the rats went. They needed something fast, something vicious, and something that wouldn't die in the heat. They needed a monster. And eventually, they found one. The solution they found would change the island forever. False hope rising. Enter William Bancroft Askew. He was a landowner who was sick of losing money. He had heard stories from his wife, Bessie. Years earlier, while living in India, she had kept a small Indian mongoose as a pet. She had seen this little creature take down rats with lightning speed. It was ruthless. It was efficient. And most importantly, it was cheap. So, in February 1872, Askew made the call. He imported a small crate from Calcutta containing just 9 mongooses. 4 males, 5 females. That was it. It sounds insane that 9 small animals could change the fate of an island covering 4,300 square miles. But nature is wild like that. They released them on the Askew plantation, and almost immediately it looked like a miracle. The mongooses didn't waste time. They went straight to work. Within months, Askew was writing letters bragging about the results. He claimed the rats were terrified, the damage had stopped, and his profits were saved. It was the news everyone had been waiting for. Suddenly, every planter in Jamaica wanted a piece of the action. They started breeding the 9 original mongooses and selling them to neighbors. The animals spread like wildfire. Within 10 years, you couldn't walk a mile in Jamaica without seeing one. They were in the lowlands, they were in the mountains, they were near the houses. By the turn of the century, the mongoose was a hero. They estimated that these little guys were saving the island roughly $30 million a year in modern currency. It was such a massive success that other islands started begging for them. From Puerto Rico to Santa Cruz, the Mongoose was shipped out to solve rat problems across the Caribbean. Everything seemed perfect. The sugar was safe. The rats were in hiding. The economy was booming again. The planners patted themselves on the backs for a job well done. They thought they had conquered nature. They thought they had won. But here is the catch: they had based this entire plan on observing a tame pet in a living room in India. They had zero clue how a wild mongoose actually behaves in a new environment. They didn't account for one crucial detail that defies every old account of animal behavior. Rats are nocturnal. They come out at night. Mongooses, they love the sun. They sleep at night. So after the initial massacre, the rats learned. They stayed up in the trees or deep in their holes during the day. The buffet was closed, but the mongooses were still hungry, and the population was exploding. They needed to eat something. And when they looked around the lush Jamaican forests, they didn't see empty fields. They saw a feast. What happened next silenced the forest completely. Nature's quiet collapse. This is where the story takes a dark turn. Imagine walking into a tropical jungle. You expect noise. You expect birds calling, frogs croaking, lizards rustling in the leaves. But a few years after the mongoose takeover, people started noticing something chilling. The noise was gone. The forests were becoming silent graveyards. Since the rats were hiding, the mongooses switched targets, and the native animals of Jamaica didn't stand a chance. You have to understand, island animals are what biologists call naive. They had evolved for millions of years without any ground predators. They didn't know they were supposed to run. Ground nesting birds, easy meals. The mongoose would just walk up and eat the eggs. Rare frogs, gone. But the biggest victims were the reptiles. Jamaica used to be crawling with snakes and iguanas. The mongoose decimated them. There was a specific green iguana that was once common. The mongoose wiped it out so fast, it made heads spin. On Santa Cruz Island, a unique land iguana vanished completely by 1962. Entire species of snakes that lived nowhere else on Earth were hunted into extinction. They were pushed to tiny offshore rocks, the only places the mongoose couldn't swim to. It wasn't just that the mongoose was hungry, it was that they were bored. Why fight a massive, vicious rat in a dark hole when you can snack on a helpless lizard sunning itself on a rock? It was a no-brainer. The destruction was total, but nature is a complex web, and when you pull one thread, the whole thing unravels. With the birds and lizards gone, the insects they used to eat had no predators. Suddenly, Jamaica was hit with a new plague: ticks. In 1891, a doctor named James Philippo gave a speech complaining about the abominable tick. People laughed at him, but it wasn't funny. The fields became infested. You couldn't walk through the grass without being covered in blood-sucking parasites. There is a crazy story about a British man named Henry Hesketh Bell who visited the island in 1896. He found a bowl of oil and a feather in his room. He thought it was some voodoo ritual. Turns out it was just the standard kit for removing ticks from your skin after a walk. The planners tried to spin it. They claimed the ticks were attacking the mongooses and restoring balance, but that was just a cover-up. The reality was that the mongoose had destroyed the island's immune system. The insect-eating guard was dead, and it didn't stop at ticks. Caterpillars exploded in numbers, destroying crops that the rats used to ignore. The mongoose, the so-called savior, had become a chaotic force of destruction. But the real horror was microscopic and deadly. No cure found. So we have an island with no snakes, no birds, and a plague of ticks. You would think it couldn't get worse, but hold on, because it does. By the mid-20th century, a new threat emerged: rabies. Originally, rabies came to the Caribbean with dogs and cats, but by the 1960s, massive vaccination drives had mostly cleaned it up in pets. The virus needed a new host to survive, and it found the perfect one: the small Indian mongoose. Because they were everywhere and they fought each other constantly, the virus spread through the mongoose population like wildfire. Today, in places like Puerto Rico, Grenada, and Cuba, the mongoose is the #1 carrier of rabies. We are talking about 70 to 80% of all rabies cases on some islands being traced back to these little guys. It is terrifying. In Puerto Rico's national parks, tourists go for picnics thinking they are in paradise. Suddenly, a mongoose wanders out of the bushes. It looks cute, but if it's carrying the virus, one bite is a death sentence once symptoms show up. There is no cure. The farmers were furious. The animals they brought in to save the livestock were now infecting cows and pigs with a fatal disease. The irony is overwhelming. Governments realized they had messed up badly. By the early 1900s, they were already trying to hit the undo button. They put bounties on mongoose tails. They encouraged hunting. In 1980, Cuba launched a massive chemical warfare campaign, scattering millions of poisoned eggs across the country. Did it work? Not even close. The mongoose is a survivor. You can wipe out 80% of a population in an area, and within 2 months they are back to full strength. They breed too fast. They are too smart. There was a study done on a small plot of land where they removed almost every single mongoose. They thought they had bought some time. 7 weeks later, the population was back to exactly where it started. It is like trying to empty the ocean with a spoon. There is also a weird phenomenon called the perturbation effect. It basically means that when you start eliminating them, you disrupt their social structure. The survivors get stressed, they travel further to find new mates, and they fight more. This actually makes the rabies virus spread faster than if you had just left them alone. So the experts were left frozen. They realized that once you let the genie out of the bottle, you cannot put it back in. Now the island is stuck with a permanent invader. The final verdict. So where does that leave us today? Jamaica and much of the Caribbean is now home to a predator that was never supposed to be there. The native snakes are mostly gone, surviving only on tiny remote islets where the mongoose can't swim. The silence in the forest is a permanent reminder of the mistake made in 1872. Scientists are still trying to find a solution. They are looking into oral vaccines to stop the rabies. They are setting traps to protect the few remaining iguanas. But nobody talks about eradication anymore. That dream is dead. The mongoose is part of the landscape now. It is a harsh lesson in how fragile nature really is. The planners looked at a complex ecosystem and thought they could fix it with simple math. Rats are the problem, predators are the solution. But nature doesn't do simple math, it does chaos. They ignored the fact that the rats were nocturnal. They ignored the diet of the mongoose. They ignored the warning signs until the birds stopped singing. What most people don't realize is that this isn't just history. It is happening right now with other species all over the world. We introduce something new, thinking we are smarter than nature, and we end up breaking the machinery of life itself. The small Indian mongoose was a 24-hour success that turned into a 100-year disaster. It proves that sometimes the cure is infinitely worse than the disease. And if you ever find yourself in the Jamaican bush and you hear nothing, just silence, remember why. It's the sound of a decision that can never be undone. Outro. So what do you think? Was it worth saving the sugar industry at the cost of an entire ecosystem? Or should humans just stop meddling with nature altogether? Let me know your take in the comments below. If you learned something new, hit that like button and subscribe for more dark history.